Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to do a charcoal drawing of some mountains and some trees in the mist. I'm going to be working on Fabriano drawing paper, about 200 GSM, about 9 times 12 inches in size. I'm going to start with this piece of willow charcoal and I'm going to sketch out the shape of the mountains. After that I'm going to do the sky. For the sky, I'm going to use some charcoal powder. Now, if you want the sky to be a little bit lighter, and I'm going to be going for an overcast, slightly darker sky. But if you want the sky to be a little bit lighter and you're afraid that the charcoal dust might end up making it too dark, there's a trick that you can use. You can throw in a little bit of white chalk with the charcoal dust, and then it will get lighter. So now I'm just gonna blend that with a paper towel or a paper tissue, and first I'm just moving it gently to distribute it more evenly, and then I try to push it in a little bit harder using circular motions to get it to look more or less even. Once I have that, I can add some clouds. And I'm going to do that with a piece of willow charcoal because I don't have to worry about the texture now, and I want to have a little bit more control over the shape of those clouds. I'm also blending this with a brush, because again with a brush I have a little bit more control over the shape of the clouds that I'm getting. And I just want a few slightly darker clouds. So once that is done, I just blend everything a little bit with a larger bristle brush, with a round brush, just to smooth it out a little bit. Now we can start working on the mountains, on these mountain peaks. And first I'm going to work with willow charcoal. So far I'm mostly working with willow charcoal, and even the charcoal powder that I used for the top part of the scene, I created that by sharpening this piece of willow charcoal. So it's a very useful material for me. By the way, in case you don't know, willow charcoal is soft natural charcoal that comes in sticks of irregular shapes and sizes. So this top part of the mountain here, this peak, is going to be kind of in the shadow. We're going to add a little bit more value to it and then just blend with a brush before I start adding any smaller details. But first I have to establish that slightly darker value so that it would stand out nicely against the background, against the sky. So just a little bit more blending with a brush. So that it's nice and smooth. Now here I'm starting to add some more details and some shadow areas to that mountain peak, and I think you can tell from the shadow areas that the light source is on the left side. It's coming more from the left because the right side is darker. I'm also adding these lighter details, like maybe those are some snowy bits which are more exposed to the light source. Here I'm starting to work on another peak, or another part of that mountain ridge, if you will, and I'm adding some more shadow to its right side. By the way, in case you find that some parts of the footage are missing, that sometimes happens because I forget to turn on the camera, and sometimes because my battery runs out. These things happen. Anyway, now I'm working with a charcoal pencil. So I use the charcoal pencil for the darker bits on that peak to the left, and now I'm using it here. The charcoal pencils I'm using are Master's Touch woodless charcoal pencils. I'm only going to use a medium charcoal pencil for this. I don't even think I'm going to need to use the soft one, because I'm already getting a lot of range of value, because the willow charcoal is a lot lighter than the charcoal pencil. So I'm just going to use the medium charcoal pencil for the darkest bits. So this part is also in the shadow. I'm going to blend that as well. Now if you look at the lighter parts of that shadow area, you will see that they are considerably lighter than the parts that I've done with the charcoal pencil. Those are also supposed to be covered with snow, or at least that's how I imagined it, except for the fact that they are largely in the shadow, which is why they appear darker. Now we also have some other parts of the mountain which are more exposed to a light source, like some of those lighter snowy bits at the top, but maybe some other snowy peaks in front and to the right, which I'm going to do a little bit later. Right now I'm just softening this a little bit with a brush and just adding some random details, like some darker rocks and cracks and some jutting rocks and stones and things like that. Here in the background I added some distant mountains which are kind of fading into the distance. These are a lot lighter in value, but more importantly there is less contrast and texture on them, because when you're looking at things at a distance, you'll see the atmospheric effect. Whatever is further away is getting less and less defined, more and more bluish, and there is less detail, less texture, because when you're drawing, texture is essentially illusion of detail. So on those objects which are further back you want less detail, and you also want less contrast. So I'm moving on to these lower parts of the mountain, this ridge under that peak to the right, to the left, and I'm kind of going to make this a little bit lighter and fade it at the bottom. I want to create that misty effect, but I also want some trees at the bottom, and in order to draw some distant trees I can't really use a pencil, because that would be too dark and too well defined, so I'm just going to use a tortillon. You can also use your tortillon as a drawing tool, so I'm going to draw with my tortillon. It picks up a little bit of charcoal and I draw some of those tops of trees. I'm going to add a little bit of willow charcoal here in the middle, and then I'm going to blend that down so it's kind of fading into that mist, and only the tops of those trees or the tops of those wooded hills are popping out of that mist. That's the idea, that's the effect that I'm trying to create. Well, you let me know how successful I was at it. Anyway, I'm making this whole bottom portion of the paper a little bit darker. It can't be too light, there needs to be at least a little bit of value. So now I'm going to draw some more trees, which are going to be a little bit more defined because they're a little bit closer to our viewpoint. So the ones which are further back, those on the left, they're barely visible all the way back in the mist. These are also going to be disappearing in the mist, but the top part of those trees is going to be a little bit more defined, which is why I'm using a piece of willow charcoal to draw them. It's that I'm not really sure how to deal with this lower part of the mountain. I want to make it kind of fade at the bottom, fade into that mist and fog, but it's easier said than done. You know, sometimes with these landscapes where there isn't a single clear reference photo, you have to make things up as you go along. And that often means modifying things. So I'm adding a group of trees here which are slightly in front of those to the left, which is why they're darker, and I'm using a piece of willow charcoal for them. So I'm going to be I'm going to leave them a little bit darker. I'm going to make them a bit more defined, but I'm going to try to fade them at the bottom. I'm going to use a brush now, and my trick here is to pull down. I pull from top to bottom, to not to smudge the upper part too much, but to smudge the lower part so that it fades at the bottom, so that it looks like those tops of the trees are popping out of the mist, but the bottom part is kind of fading into that mist at the bottom of the hill. And now, because I want a layered scene with more and more trees and elements, I'm going to add more trees in front of those trees. So these trees that I'm drawing now are even closer to the ones in the middle. So I'm making them darker, I'm making them larger, because it's a matter of perspective. Whichever object is closer to our viewpoint, it's going to appear larger. It's also going to appear more defined. It's going to have more contrast and more texture. I want another one, taller one here. I want to vary their size a little bit because that'll give an illusion to the viewer, like some of these trees are a little bit closer to our viewpoint, others are a little bit further away. So I'm trying to create an illusion of depth by varying the size of the trees and the amount of value in those trees. I'm softening everything with a brush because these are still not exactly a part of the foreground. I'm going to be drawing some objects which are even closer than these ones, but so far so good. I'm going to keep adding some more trees here in the mist, but these the ones that I'm drawing now are a little bit closer to our viewpoint, so they're a lot better defined, so there's not going to be any mist at the bottom. And what I do when I draw these trees, and these are all coniferous trees like fir trees or whatever, I just draw a vertical line to give myself an idea about the overall size of the tree, I suppose. And then I draw the horizontal shapes, drawing those branches and clusters of needles on them. Here and there I'm drawing some groups of trees which are popping out of that mist. And I can draw interrupted patches or clusters of trees here and there, so that maybe it looks like an uneven terrain where some parts of those hills are popping out of the mists and others are lower down, like a valley or something. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, now I'm going to draw some much darker elements which are much closer to our viewpoint. So basically this is already a part of the foreground. I'm going to draw a tall tree here all the way on the right. And for this one I'm going to use charcoal pencil. So I need it to be darker, and I need to produce a lot of detail and texture. And what the charcoal pencil does, it produces a lot of texture. It produces a lot more texture than willow charcoal. So I want that texture because texture gives you the illusion of detail. The pencil works for you by creating some unpredictable lines and dots and things like that that the viewer can interpret as details. So we're just giving the viewer something to entertain his eye and to create an illusion like he's looking at something really, really detailed, when in fact I'm just using a bunch of lines to draw something that looks like a shape of a tree. Of course, it's easier said than done. This takes a little bit of practice, but if you just study some reference photos of some coniferous trees, you can pretty much get it to look close to what it's supposed to look like. It also depends on the types of the trees, but I don't really worry about that too much. I'm just going to make it look like generic coniferous trees, whatever they are. And I'm going to throw in a few more darker ones here at the bottom in the middle. These are darker because they're slightly in front of the ones to the left. So you see that I'm kind of manipulating the amount of value so that I could create that feeling of depth and distance, because the objects which are closer to us are going to appear darker and darker and more defined. The objects which are further away are going to be lighter. And by using that contrast in value, I'm creating that illusion of depth. It's also a good thing for the composition, because that contrast between the between the elements which are darker in value in the foreground and the objects which are lighter in value creates a tension which captures the attention of the viewer, in addition to creating that feeling of depth and distance. That feeling of depth is one of the main goals I'm always trying to achieve when I'm drawing landscapes. I want to draw the viewer into the scene, make them feel like they're really looking into the distance, like they can really feel the depth of that scene. And it's largely a matter of composition, but it depends on a lot of other things, such as the effective use of the amount of texture, value, and as well as the size of the objects, because just by varying the size of the objects you're implying the distance of those objects. Here I did a little bit of erasing and a little bit of softening because I didn't really like the shape of that wooded area. I wanted to break up that fairly clean and defined line, and I made it a little bit more misty and foggy, and I think it looks a little bit better this way. I don't know. You let me know in the comments. It's a little bit of a messy scene, but I'm just modifying things and modifying the composition as I go along. I'm just fading the bottom of the bottom part of the mountain here. I just want to say a few words about the bottom part of those darker trees to the right. I made the whole thing here a little bit darker. I'm just going over it a little bit. I don't have to worry about the texture too much. I just left a few of those lighter spaces, just like some suggestions of the light breaking through. Now, at one point I felt like maybe did I have enough trees? Maybe I should add more trees. You know what? I decided to add more trees. I decided to add more trees here on the left side as well. And these are going to be darker, which means they're in front of the ones which are further back, which are a little bit lighter. So I'm just going to throw in a few taller trees here as well. You can never have enough trees, I suppose. So I'm going to draw a couple more. Maybe that's a mistake from the perspective of the composition, but I like it. And I'm just going to draw another tall, darker tree here, a tall coniferous tree. Of course, because it's closer to our viewpoint, it needs to be a little bit better defined, so I'm working with a charcoal pencil and adding all of those smaller details, like those clusters of needles and things like that, trying to define its structure and shape a little bit better. And at the bottom, I'm just going to make it a little bit darker, and I don't really have to worry about detail that much at the bottom. I'm just going to make that whole area a little bit darker. But I do like this balance that I created now by adding some darker elements on the left side as well. Just doing some minor modifications to the scene, and I'm going to put my signature in the lower left corner. I'm just going to draw my signature with a pencil eraser. And now the drawing is done. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to check out my other videos, subscribe, give me a like, and for longer videos and more content, check out my Patreon. Bye bye.